Hello and welcome everyone to our very exciting event today, Higher Education and Youth Activism, Stories and Strategies for Collective Action. My name is Samantha Alvis, and I am a Senior Advisor for Higher Education in the Center for Education at USAID. I'm delighted to welcome you to this event on behalf of the USAID Higher Education Learning Network, or as we affectionately call it, the HELEN, as well as USAID Center for Education and the Center for Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. I will be hosting today's event alongside my colleague from USAID's DRG Center, Neetha Tangirala. Before we get to know all of you in the chat, I would like to mention that we will be recording today's event and the video will be available for viewing later on. Again, we'd love to know who's joining us for today's event. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and share your affiliated organization, where you're located, and why you've joined us today. While you all are doing that in the chat, I do want to just take a moment to share some norms for our time together. You can select your language, English, French, or Spanish. Those audio channels are available by clicking on the world icon at the bottom of your screen. Auto closed captioning is also available. You can do that by selecting the CC icon. Please also ensure that your display name matches your registration name, and if necessary, you can change your name by hovering over your name in the participant list. Please ensure that your microphone is muted and that your camera is off when not talking so that we can avoid technical difficulties and for those in low bandwidth settings. Please add comments to the chat whenever you would like. We'd love to see your interaction during the event. And in case you missed it just a moment ago, we are recording so that those who cannot attend can access the information later. If you need technical support during the webinar, please send a private message on Zoom to an LTLGP producer using the chat function at the bottom of the screen. All right, with that housekeeping out of the way, today we are also joined by LeAnna Marr, USAID's Deputy Assistant Administrator for Education. Thank you for being with us today. LeAnna, would you care to say a few words to get us started?
Great. Well, thank you, Samantha. A huge thank you to both you and Neetha for all the work that you've put into organizing this event. I'm super excited that the USAID Higher Education Learning Network, HELEN, has put together this event. It's really an opportunity to learn directly from youth and from each other. HELEN supports USAID's priority to localize its work by elevating local learning, knowledge, and expertise to seek solutions with the global platform support. This event is a direct result of our continued partnership with Powered by the People and contributes to the greater objectives of the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal. Today's event demonstrates the power of collaboration and commitment by both USAID Center for Education and USAID Center for Democracy, Rights, and Governance. Together, we can advance democratic development and sustainable civic participation through the power of higher education. We know that strong higher education systems are critical to achieving all development objectives and also because of the role higher education plays in society. That includes providing quality and relevant education and training, advancing knowledge and research, and engaging and strengthening networks and communities. Well, I worked in Juba. I was the Education Office Director in Juba, South Sudan for 3 years. And there we did have a wonderful higher education program that was set up to help more women obtain master's degrees for secondary school teachers. The idea behind this was by promoting more women into leadership positions through higher ed in the education sector, that we would provide role models and they would have kind of a pull effect so other women could see what is possible in continuing their education. Sadly, violence broke out around the Capitol. We needed to quickly kind of shift gears on this program, and we ended up supporting scholarships for women to come to the US and do a program. We selected women from diverse ethnic backgrounds in South Sudan, and they did a program on education and peace building together. This was really, really a powerful program. all of the women that came, all 12 women, are now working in higher education institutions in South Sudan. And most importantly, they formed a strong network across the country and worked together on peace initiatives. I think that this example really highlights the importance of higher education's power to connect diverse and disparate communities to support collective action. I actually had the opportunity to see a sneak peek of some of the youth speakers that we'll have on today, some really strong women advocates for both higher education and women's rights. And I just believe the power that women, particularly young women, can play in leading collective action, and the importance of women's leadership and the way that higher education can enhance leadership skills. It's a topic that's really important to me because for a long time, USAID and others working in international education have been strong advocates for girls' education. But if we're simply getting more girls into a system that the leadership is dominated by men, that's rife with school-related gender-based violence, we still have systemic issues that we have to deal with. And I really believe through higher education and that role it plays in promoting leadership, and particularly women's leadership, can make a huge difference. I'd love to see more women as deans and rectors of universities, as ministers of education, as inspectors, as school directors. And all of those things are achieved through higher education and by women seeing role models in higher education institutions. I guess let me just switch a little bit back today. I think what I'd like to do is challenge each and every one of you here today to think critically, not only about higher education's role in civil society, but the importance of youth's full participation in sustainable development, including building resilient democratic societies, and how we can best support youth so that they can make that happen. USAID's education policy underscores the critical role of higher education institutions being drivers of development in their countries. USAID's youth and development policy and positive youth development framework help us development. As the Helen brings together USAID, its partners, and stakeholders, we should work to elevate the voices of youth and provide youth with a space to lead the way. So a huge thank you again, Samantha and Neetha, for the opportunity to speak today. And I'm just so looking forward to hearing all the other speakers. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, LeAnna, for helping to illustrate the connections between higher education, collective action, and positive youth development to help kick off our event. As we've mentioned, today's event is a collaboration between the Center for Education and the Center for Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. So I'd like to invite my co-host, Neetha Tangirala, to join me on the screen and share with us a bit more about what we know about collective action and democratic movements and what the evidence tells us about higher education's role. Over to you.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Also, thank you so much, LeAnna, for your remarks. I really, really appreciate this collaboration. Higher education is critical to maintaining and expanding civic space and for fostering democratic culture. Higher education institutions teach civic education, promote civic engagement, train journalists and political scientists and teachers, and allow a space for critical thinking. Higher education can play an even bigger role in advancing democracies around the globe by strengthening nonviolent or peaceful collective action. Nonviolent or peaceful collective action is the political, social, psychological, or economic action that people use to build and apply power. This kind of nonviolent collective action helps democracies develop and remain resilient and can support changes in policy, cultural norms, and attitudes. We know from the research that nonviolent collective action in the form of social movements has been twice as effective as violence in achieving stated goals. These kinds of movements, particularly when they include women on the front lines, are much more likely to succeed and to lead to more egalitarian democracies as well. We also know from the research that there are several strategies that can strengthen collective action. First, fostering trust-based relationships and networks among a wide range of formal and informal civic actors creates broad support, particularly from historically excluded communities. Second, training civil society actors and activists in areas such as leadership and innovative tactics can help strengthen the capacity, legitimacy, and agency of social movements. Third, providing technical and psychosocial support to activists, such as supporting scholarship of social movements and providing resources to expand and adapt social movements to help them adapt, can enhance their effectiveness and resiliency. These strategies for strengthening collective action and social movements have a natural connection to the role higher education plays in societies through education and training and networking, community engagement, research, and innovation. We've seen activists within higher education institutions in South Africa, Hong Kong, and elsewhere in the world engage in collective action to support democratic and grassroots movements. Last week, we wrapped the second Summit for Democracy and renewed our commitment to support places for activists to meet, share, and learn. Today's event will help advance our shared understanding of approaches and best practices for strengthening higher education to support peaceful collective action. Today's event, which is sponsored by the Helen in partnership with Powered by the People, will help inform an evidence primer and build this evidence through your contributions on how higher education institutions can promote and strengthen a culture of collective action and activism, support young activists, and nurture the long-term participation of citizens in civic life. Before we engage in our collective discussion, we will be hearing directly from youth activists about the role higher education has played in supporting their activism. And for that, I will turn this back over to Samantha to introduce our speakers and to get us started. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you so much. That was just a really great overview to help set the stage for the stories we're about to hear from three young activists. I'm so excited to introduce our speakers from different contexts and different forms of activism. These young women who are here with us today have made incredible impacts in their communities, supporting young women's health, education, and career development. In each of their stories, these young activists will share not only their passion and their contributions to their communities, but they'll also talk about the critical role that higher education played in supporting their activism. Some of them are able to join us today, so if you have any questions for them, feel free to put them in the chat. So let's jump in with a story from Ayobami Borisade, a youth activist from Nigeria whose activism focuses on women's reproductive and menstrual health, as well as their inclusion in society.
My name is Ayobami Borisade from Ekiti State, Nigeria. I am studying microbiology at Olusegun Agagri University of Science and Technology in Okitipupa, Ondo State, and I'm 24 years old. As a girl child activist, I work on inspiring change towards sexual reproductive health and rights of the girl child. I educate and empower adolescent girls, especially girls with disabilities, on overcoming identified social issues in our society, such as sexual, gender-based violence, female genital mutilation, period poverty, and child marriage. My path towards activism started with my own personal experiences. I've lived with the stigmatization that comes with the fact that my mother gave birth to me when she was a teenager. So as a 14-year-old girl, giving birth to a child disrupted our own vision for our entire life. As a child, I grew up with a low self-esteem because I found myself in a community that believes that children of teenage pregnancies will end up like their mother. I viewed myself not to be good, or that my existence was problem to everyone, especially my mother. Contributing to this feeling was the fact that I've been able to escape sexual violence twice. These experiences, along with my family situation, seemed to be sources of pain for me until I got admitted into the university in 2018. That's Olusegun Agagri University of Science and Technology, Ondo State, Nigeria. And I found myself in a diverse community surrounded by people with a high rate of teenage mothers, different forms of sexual abuse, and even child marriage. I decided to reason towards how my experiences could be a solution towards the problem faced by the girl child. In my immediate environment, I reached out to some of my departmental colleagues in school and explained my plans for the girl child in that community. So I got a group of volunteers from my course mates, and we started with a sensitization program for 500 female students in Okitivupa, Ondo State. We tagged this program the Girls Pride and addressed the topic of teenage pregnancy, abstinence, and menstrual health and hygiene through a day program. We learned through this work that a more extensive approach was needed. So the Girls Pride evolved into the Girls Pride Initiative, a volunteer-based organization with a work plan. In our first year, our programs expanded to engaging in programs for capacity building for girls and women with disability, campaigns on ending female genital mutilation, mentorship programs for girls in tech in Ondo State and others like Ekiti State. We also partnered with a few organizations outside Nigeria whose vision aligns with us, such as Iguguletu Foundation, Zimbabwe, Let's Speak Girls Inc., Liberia. During this year of growth, we became registered and changed our name to the Girls Pride Initiatives for Sustainable Development. And we now have a structured organization, board members, and staff. With all of this growth, I feel that my tertiary education shaped my activism because it gave me the platform to access and network with other activists who share my objectives and create a synergy with them in order to achieve my goals. In addition, I also was able to seek out mentorship with my current head of department, who is also a lecturer at my university. Being in the school gave me access to such an experienced and influential person who has contributed positively to my development, both in academics and activism. Not only did my institution support me in these ways, but my course of study as a microbiologist also enlightened me more on the reproductive health of the girl child, as it makes me well informed on related issues that could arise from child marriage, sexual abuse, or poor menstrual management. This in turn backs my activism up with facts and gives room for me to identify effective solutions. This is also an area where I feel the university could be more supportive in providing more research opportunities. Having access to more opportunities for research into microorganisms, menstrual health, and hygienic practices for girls will be useful when it comes to my organization's outreach in relation to menstrual management. The practical aspect of my course of study would have contributed more to my knowledge to apply to my social impact work. Over a short period of time, while attending university, our organization has grown and accomplished much. For example, our capacity building program on ending all forms of violence against girls and women with disabilities empowered 75 girls and women across 4 communities in Ondo State to stand as advocates for this social problem. Another example of the impact of our work is a Red Flag Conference, which is held every year in commemoration of World Menstrual Hygiene Day, and highlights that we've been providing sanitary wear for over 250 girls on a yearly basis. My experience as a student activist shows that higher education impact is not limited to academic achievements only, but it's a platform for exposure and a good avenue for students to identify how they could actively contribute to the development of their society. Thank you.
That was such a touching and inspiring story. Thank you so much, Ayobami, for sharing your experience and knowledge with us on how your institution has supported you and how they can better support its students going forward by investing in scholarship and research opportunities. Our next youth activist, Dayana Blanco Quiroga, comes from Bolivia and advocates for the inclusion of indigenous women into higher education.
Soy Dayana Blanco Quiroga, una mujer indígena aymara de Bolivia. La educación en las comunidades indígenas no es un derecho, es un privilegio. Debido a ello, tuve que enfrentar muchos retos para poder acceder a la educación superior. El reto más difícil para mí fue la falta de apoyo económico, pero en mi caso recibí el apoyo de una organización que transformó mi camino, me ayudó a desarrollar aptitudes de liderazgo y me otorgó ayuda económica. Incluso con ese apoyo me enfrenté a un choque cultural cuando ingresé a la universidad. Mi experiencia personal en la educación superior me mostró la importancia de empoderar a las mujeres indígenas a través del fortalecimiento de las habilidades de liderazgo y la educación. Mi experiencia me motivó a crear Warmi Shining después de terminar la universidad y viajar a otro país gracias a una beca de la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en Bolivia llamada el Winter Institute. En mis viajes, tuve la oportunidad de conocer a otras hermanas indígenas de Ecuador, Perú y Paraguay y comprender cómo ellas luchan contra las desigualdades del sistema a través de sus proyectos propios. El objetivo de nuestro programa es crear oportunidades para mis hermanas indígenas, proporcionando clases integrales y gratuitas en asociación con diferentes organizaciones como Education USA en Bolivia, Chicas Huasquiris y otras. Nuestro trabajo se basa en 3 pilares. El primero es clases gratuitas de inglés para acceder a oportunidades de universidades internacionales. El segundo pilar son los talleres de liderazgo para capacitar a nuestras becarias en diferentes temas como la oratoria, democracia y los derechos humanos de los pueblos indígenas. Y el tercero son las actividades de voluntariado. Muchos de nuestras becarias han mencionado que las actividades de voluntariado les han ayudado a descubrir su vocación y qué campos les apasiona y les ayuda a decidir qué estudiarán en la universidad. Empecé Warmi Shining con otros activistas que enfrentaban los mismos retos que yo. Aunque conseguimos acceder a una educación de mayor calidad, nos enfrentamos a retos como las limitaciones económicas, la discriminación y el choque cultural. En aquellos casos fue importante mantener nuestra autenticidad como mujeres indígenas y empoderarnos como líderes sin abandonar nuestras raíces indígenas como mi dialecto nativo, mis creencias y mis costumbres. Sabíamos que Warmi Shining ayudaría a nuestras hermanas indígenas que se enfrenten a estos mismos retos, proporcionando apoyo financiero a nuestras becarias para aplicar a universidades en Bolivia. Uno de nuestros socios, Education USA, también ayuda a nuestras becarias a pagar los costos de aplicación y examen, los gastos de transporte y viáticos cuando aplican a universidades en los Estados Unidos. Warmi Shining también lucha en contra de la discriminación a través de nuestro taller centrado en la Declaración sobre los Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas e informa a nuestras participantes sobre el mecanismo internacional al que debemos recurrir cuando sufrimos discriminación o acoso. Nuestros talleres también ofrecen información sobre los mecanismos de ayuda a las comunidades indígenas cuando sufren discriminación en Bolivia y el proceso de denuncia según las leyes bolivianas. En Warmi Shining recibimos solicitudes de cualquier persona perteneciente a la comunidad indígena. Proporcionamos nuestros objetivos a través de las redes sociales, charlas informativas y folletos impresos. También promovemos nuestro programa en diferentes escuelas, formando alianzas con escuelas que desean que sus alumnos se beneficien de este programa. Mi educación superior me permitió ponerme en contacto con personas del mundo académico que realizan proyectos similares relacionados con la educación. Me proporcionó una red de expertos y la posibilidad de aprender los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poner en marcha un proyecto. Mi formación académica incluye conocimientos técnicos sobre cómo delegar cargos en el personal y cómo medir nuestros resultados a través de encuestas, entrevistas y reuniones de grupo con los beneficiarios del programa. El acceso a la educación superior también me dio la oportunidad de acceder a espacios y redes internacionales que han influido en la manera de conducir mi activismo. A través de nuestra educación integral, mi grupo y yo hemos logrado impactar la vida de 100 mujeres indígenas. Uno de nuestros principales logros ha sido aumentar la probabilidad de que nuestras becarias sean aceptadas en universidades de prestigio, no solo en Bolivia, sino también en universidades internacionales. Por ejemplo, una de nuestras becarias fue aceptada en una universidad de Estados Unidos y otra formó parte de un programa prestigioso llamado Jóvenes Embajadores. Muchos de nuestras becarias fueron parte de programas impactantes como Tech Girls, Chicas Huasquiri, Youth Science Camp, entre otros. En Warmi Shining sabemos que los 3 pilares en los que estamos trabajando son importantes para abrir oportunidades a las mujeres indígenas de poder acceder a una educación superior de mayor calidad y así poder ocupar puestos de liderazgo. Nuestro objetivo es hacer posible que la educación de las mujeres indígenas no sea simplemente un privilegio, sino un derecho. Gracias.
Dayana, thank you. Your story highlights so well the ways that education systems can better prepare students for engagement in higher education and civil society from a socio-cultural, economic, and political perspective. Our next speaker, Josephine Chinake, is sharing her story with us today from South Africa. Having navigated her way towards activism during her undergraduate and graduate education, Josephine will touch on women and girls leadership development and inclusion in the tech industry.
Hi, my name is Josephine Chinake and I'm based in South Africa, but originally I'm from Zimbabwe, where I studied business and information technology as my undergraduate and impact entrepreneurship during my graduate studies. As an activist and a woman in tech, I advocate for women to take up more space in the tech industry. My work focuses on trying to bridge the gap between the ladies and the tech opportunities through dialogue, mentorship, and inspiration. These dialogues eventually grew into nonprofit work with Girls in Tech Zimbabwe, as well as Project Girls for Girls in Zimbabwe as well. These organizations offer mentorship for girls to be able to enter the tech space and encourage girls and women to take up more leadership roles and positions in their lives. So my graduate studies mostly shaped my impact in activism because they gave me the knowledge to execute the work. I was assigned a mentor as part of my global MBA postgraduate studies as a requirement, a prerequisite for that program. I was paired with an awesome mentor who was an accomplished businessman in the Southern African region in Africa. His mentorship supported my activism as he advised me to start and register a nonprofit organization focused on the issues that my advocacy addresses. He also made available a pool of resources for me to use, such as office space, human capital, and his networks. He allowed me to tap into his networks, which is something that I appreciate very much because this propelled my mentorship and helped me excel in my career path. Higher education has offered me the networking opportunities with the people within my scope of work. The access has allowed me to have the opportunity to learn and grow individually, and as activism is concerned, it is highly propelling as well. My activism work has evolved from me having discussion with my graduate peers, from me going out into the community to speak and engage with young people. This was propelled chiefly by Project Girls for Growth Zimbabwe, of which I am now a proud country chapter lead for the country of Zimbabwe. The programming has involved me directly with mentoring at least 100 girls from the year 2020 alone, which COVID-19 was prevailing. We have conducted cohort meetings across Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, physically and virtually with the rise of COVID-19, because unfortunately we were not able to meet in person. Through this work, I am creating a space where women who are already in the industry can help all those who want to start and begin their journey in tech. How are we doing this? We have created a community that we run and manage and to reach out to more people. My goal is to reach for more people to take up more space in tech. In the tech industry, statistically speaking, women only occupy 28%, and we would love to raise the bar to at least 50%. That's my mandate. However, there are definitely ways higher education could have supported this journey. During my undergraduate years, there was little to no help offered to students in the university in form of career guidance. The little guidance that I got then came from actively looking for help and following those who have made it in the path that I wanted to take as well. This made it easier for me because I could see the path that they have taken, and I could actively reach out to them to try and do the same thing. I am honestly of the opinion that to remedy this gap in tertiary institutions, the students should also be taught essential non-academic topics like communication, leadership, and career guidance. The side of the coin not addressed adequately, but will help activism in its various forms have even a greater reach. It includes soft skills classes, mentoring, career guidance as early as students start their higher education. These would have helped me prepare for the real life scenarios that I am likely to face as a graduate. The advice that I have for fellow students activists is this: I would like to implore you to take a bet on yourself, to believe in yourself, in your capabilities, invest in yourself, learn, unlearn, and relearn. In your capacity, do what you can. Do not be afraid to ask for help and a helping hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine, for sharing not only the power of higher education to mentor activists, but the ways in which higher education can be strengthened to better support youth activism and collective action. I want to take a moment to thank each of these activists, Ayobami, Dayana, and Josephine, for sharing your experiences and really giving us a great starting point to begin our discussion about higher education's role in supporting collective action. So I'd like to invite Neetha back to facilitate our conversation. Neetha, I was just wondering, as someone who supports USAID's work in democracy, human rights, and governance, what stood out to you most about our youth speakers' stories and their connections to higher education?
Thank you so much, Samantha. And yes, thanks to our youth speakers who shared their passion and their success. For me, you all are making important contributions to your society and engaging in the kinds of collective action that can have such a positive impact in people's lives and their communities. I think these young people really have given us a lot to think about in relation to how higher education supported their activism and the ways they wish their higher education could have been changed or improved to better support them. I think it's clear that you need this whole of community support in different modalities, in different types of trainings and peer mentorship and mentoring and other non-academic skills, like Jennifer mentioned on chat, that can help folks at higher education institutions really kind of develop the skills to engage in nonviolent collective action. So thinking about what we heard from our speakers and the research on strengthening collective action, let's take a closer look at the USAID Higher Education Program Framework. The three core functions of a higher education system, shown here in light blue, have clear connections to students' abilities to engage in collective action, some of which we heard about today, from providing relevant education and training that integrates applied civic education programming to investing in research that supports students' collective engagements, and of course, to strengthening ties between students and the higher education institution and civil society. Higher education and the cultivation of an open democratic society are interconnected. This really leads us to the question that is going to frame our conversation for the next 20 minutes, which is, how can higher education support student activism, particularly for advancing democracy, human rights, and social change? So let's engage in a little collective action among ourselves as we begin our discussion. Where do you want to take this conversation? I'm going to ask you to vote on which part of the framework that you'd like to discuss and to share your knowledge and experience. To participate, you can complete the Zoom poll, which will appear on your screen. There it is. I will give you about 15 seconds to respond to the question based on your own experience with higher education or collective action and what we've heard from our speakers. Which of these core functions of a higher education system is most important to supporting student activism? So you'll see here the question says, which of these core functions of higher education system is most important to supporting student activism? A, providing quality and relevant education. B, advancing knowledge and research. And C, engaging and strengthening networks and communities. Give it a few seconds to see the results. All right. Overwhelmingly, we have an interest in engaging and strengthening networks and communities. Fantastic. It's actually the one I voted for as well. All right. So let's discuss the role of that higher education plays in the larger civil society and how it works to network, connect, and strengthen communities. This is such a critical role that higher education plays, and we've heard that from, we heard that from Josephine and her example of a faculty member mentoring her, as well as Ayobami finding collaborators and fellow activists in her classroom. Let's take a moment and have everyone respond to the first question on your screen. What are some examples of how institutions and the individuals within them help to network, connect, and strengthen communities locally and globally in ways that support collective action? What does higher education do well with regards to networking and community engagement that can support collective action? We have some wonderful staff working in the background to help us visualize our answers. So here is that question. How can higher ed institutions help connect students to support and engage on issues impacting their local communities and global causes? And you'll see the link to the Menti on chat. And the French translation. Fantastic. Again, the question is, how can higher ed institutions help connect students to support and engage on issues impacting their local communities and global causes? And a Spanish translation as well. I see on chat that Josephine mentioned that the barcode disappeared. I think we're clicking on the Menti link in the chat. So yes, for the audience, click on the Menti link in the chat. You'll see www.menti.com. Should take you to this question. And then you enter the code at the top of the slide. Fantastic. All right, let's take a look at some of the results that have come in. So again, how can higher institutions help connect students to support and engage on issues impacting their local community and global causes? We see opportunities for service learning embedded in curriculum. I completely agree. For me, that is community service, for example, incorporating real world problem-based learning into curriculum. Again, kind of bringing real life scenarios into the curriculum is so critical. Mentorship programs, we know that they have great impact. Help elevate voices and ideas that may otherwise not have a space to reach widely or strongly. Institutions can give them the boost to get started. Extension programs, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for your responses. Now let's think about how we can improve this function of higher education and move on to our next question for you. And please remember, we're going to be using your answers to help inform an evidence primer on this topic. So we really appreciate your responses. Let's take a look at the next question, and you can again access it through the same link in the chat. Or return to your phones and click go to next question. And again, this is on Menti. How can higher education's networking and community engagement functions be strengthened to support a culture of activism and collective action? How can higher education networking and community engagement functions be strengthened to support a culture of activism and collective action? Please click on the link in the chat or click go to next question if you're already on Menti. And I really, really appreciate this frame of a culture of activism and collective action. So incredibly critical to sort of democratic strengthening, to think of things in terms of a culture of democracy, culture of activism and collective action. It's about that democratic practice. All right. Remember to click on that link and see the translations to the questions on the chat. Wonderful. We'll wait a few seconds to see everyone's answers. I'm on the edge of my seat. Again, you can find the link to the poll using the hyperlink and the code 78097097. Wonderful. Let's take a look at some of the answers. So, how can higher education's networking and community engagement functions be strengthened to support a culture of activism and collective action? Need faculty who are networked and engaged in communities to help students? Absolutely. That also came clear in a recent civic education in the digital age primer the agency released. A big part of this is teacher training. And so really helpful to see that, inviting community leaders into university decision making. That's an excellent one. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's actually really, really helpful to hear. More funding and higher visibility, engaging students with resource persons who can make presentations during program study. I love that. That's like a real sort of direct connection to communities. Day of service within the local community. Again, we're seeing that sort of community service piece. Networking and community engagement are at the core of activism and collective action. We need to recognize and support those existing networks. I completely agree. It's again about creating that sort of communitarian thinking and that practice of democracy, which means, networking and community engagement are so critical to that. Thank you, Samantha, for dropping in the link to the primer, which also gets from an evidence base at some of these things described here today. Actively supporting the activities with funds and non-monetary support like meeting space and marketing. Oh, that's fantastic. Because again, sometimes it's about also providing the space for community organizers, which also then can expose that community organizing work to those on campus. So thank you for those responses. Looks like we have time to tackle an additional open question. We'd still love to hear what you think about the other two core elements of the higher education framework and their relation to supporting student collective action. Feel free to put your ideas into the poll linked in the chat about the ways that we can support how quality and relevant education and advancing knowledge and research, the other two elements within the framework can support collective action and what they can do better. So if you want to jump into the poll link in the chat, there it is, menti.com. We just wanted to take a few minutes to hear your thoughts on the other two elements within the framework, providing quality and relevant education and advancing knowledge and research. Wonderful. Take a few minutes. Again, similarly, how can they help support? How can these elements support collective action and what they can do better? What does that look like in terms of the education piece, in terms of advancing knowledge and research? Take a few seconds. And click on the link in the chat, menti.com.
Neetha, while we're waiting for folks to share on these two others, just thinking back to what we just heard from folks on the community engagement aspect, you in particular had said yes on the community service aspect. Just off the top of our heads here, do you have any examples of where you've seen that that aspect of higher ed with students engaged in community service really having an impact on local communities?
Yeah, I think for me, what stood out is where they're integrated as a part of clubs, sort of student government clubs or clubs that are tackling particular issues around social justice. And I've also seen, where, civil society organizations will come onto campus to sort of recruit volunteers to come engage on certain issues, related to food, access to food, or discussing, housing issues and how people on campus or in a variety of higher education institution spaces engage on those issues. And so that's been really great because, again, you want to find ways to connect with local communities, but on local and global issues. And I think most practically, we've seen that manifest in community service.
Right. Yeah, it also, for me, makes me think about our University Scholars Program in Lebanon, which is a scholarship activity, has community service embedded as a requirement of the scholarship recipients. And we really saw during the height of COVID, these students providing a lot of essential services, especially for elderly and homebound residents, and that there's a lot of great impactful stories about how students serving in their community actually have influenced those students to go on for collective action in their communities, or to go on to establish nonprofits or work at nonprofits that help to provide some of that civic engagement across issues like you mentioned, like food security, elder care and whatnot. So it really can be such a strong way to take skills from the classroom and see how they can impact in a local community. And Jennifer is reminding me in the chat, we also had a session during the last, the Higher Education Evidence Summit that we had last May with the William and Mary Global Innovation Challenge that had an interesting way about thinking about community engagement to solve development challenges.
No, that's really helpful to hear. And I think, you know, in answering kind of how we can do this better is, I think, helping introduce civil society organizations to even the idea that they can engage higher education institutions and see them as spaces to really recruit and bring in, you know, and bring in new, you know, bring in citizens and new people who may not have even understood their work or even heard of their work. And so I think that's where we can make those connections. Yeah. And I think it's absolutely critical.
Neetha, I think you touched on a point that I added in thinking about how education and training is thinking about that project-based real world experience being able to be integrated into curriculum, and nonprofits or civil society organizations can be partnering with their local higher ed institutions for what I like to think of as course-sourced projects. I remember in my own master's degree working with a local nonprofit to strengthen a communications campaign. It was you know, an animal rescue organization, and they needed some help with marketing. And so me and colleagues in my master's program developed a whole campaign for them. So, you know, it was a real win-win. The nonprofit got some extra resources. We had gained this practical experience of doing something that I saw in the chat of not just theoretical, but actual practical work. So Neetha, thanks so much for leading this discussion, and thank you to all who have shared your experiences, suggestions, and examples. I want to thank LeAnna Marr, our Deputy Assistant Administrator, for her introduction. And again, a special thank you to Ayobami, Dayana, and Josephine for sharing their compelling stories. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation here, and that through the partnership with Helen and Powered by the People, we'll be able to contribute our knowledge and understanding of this topic in the future. The Helen will be continuing its work to help capture, generate, and share evidence related to higher education's role in supporting youth activism, and to continue collaboration with the Powered by the People initiative. If you have a special interest in higher education's role in student activism and collective action, or perhaps you're a researcher or practitioner with knowledge in this area, please feel free to reach out to the Helen directly at USAID@edc.org to find out about some special opportunities to support our work. We will also be sending along a link to the poll that we conducted today if you have additional feedback or recommendations you'd like to provide. As we mentioned, this conversation today will help us to inform an evidence primer that we'll be developing based on this topic. And if you're interested in engaging with the Helen through our upcoming events, please join us later this month for our second annual Fail Fest, where we hear directly from members about what went wrong in their programs and activities and how they adapted. Registration for this year's Fail Fest, which is focused on employability of higher education students and graduates, will be open next week via the Helen's website and LinkedIn. You can also see on the screen some other upcoming events focused on higher education and resilience, as well as our previous series on access and equity. I invite you, if you haven't already, to join this vibrant community to continue to learn from and with each other. To be part of the Helen's work, you can join the Helen by clicking on the link in the chat or by scanning the QR codes on your screen. We welcome new members and look forward to your future contributions to our growing network. And with that, we conclude our event. Please take a minute to respond to our feedback survey that has short questions in English, Spanish, and French. It will show up in a browser when you leave this meeting. Your responses will help us to improve future web events offered by the Helen. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.